In the heart of Seoul's International District, where peace treaties between rival crime families hang by threads thinner than honor, Zara Williams maintains the delicate balance that keeps the city from burning. But when her eyes meet those of Kim Dae-ho across a crowded restaurant, she realizes that some attractions are dangerous enough to destroy everything she has worked to build. At 24, Zara had become the youngest cultural liaison ever appointed to Seoul's Neutrality Commission, the independent body that mediated disputes between the city's various syndicate territories. She possessed a rare combination of diplomatic intelligence and street wisdom, earned through 3 years of navigating the treacherous waters between Korean crime families, Japanese Yakuza cells, and emerging African merchant collectives. Her Korean was fluent, her Mandarin passable, and her understanding of criminal politics sharp enough to keep blood off the streets. Tonight found her working late at the International Community Center, a converted warehouse in the heart of the district where she held court most evenings. Her natural hair was pulled back in a professional bun that somehow managed to look both authoritative and elegant, framing a face that commanded respect from men twice her age and 3 times as dangerous. She wore a tailored black blazer over dark slacks, an outfit that projected competence without ostentation, appropriate for someone whose job was to remain above the fray. The call came at 8:47. A territorial dispute between the Kim family's shipping operations and the Okoro Collective's import business had escalated beyond what the street-level mediators could handle. Both sides were demanding formal arbitration before the situation devolved into the kind of violence that would bring unwanted government attention to the district. Zara gathered her files and headed for Jumgang, the upscale Korean restaurant that served as neutral ground for such meetings. The establishment belonged to no single family, its ownership deliberately obscured through a web of shell companies that ensured all syndicates could meet there without losing face. The dining rooms were elegant enough to satisfy the egos of crime lords while being public enough to discourage outright violence. She arrived to find the usual cast of representatives already seated in the private dining room reserved for such occasions. The Kim family had sent their standard diplomatic team, 3 men in expensive suits who spoke in measured tones and calculated silences. The Okoro Collective was represented by 4 individuals, including 2 women whose presence indicated this was serious business, as African criminal enterprises typically reserved female representation for their most important negotiations. What Zara did not expect was to see Kim Dae-ho himself seated at the head of the table. At 36, Dae-ho had inherited control of the Kim family operations from his father 3 years earlier and had since transformed what was once a traditional Korean gang into something approaching a multinational corporation. His legitimate businesses included shipping, real estate development, and technology investment, though everyone understood these served primarily as fronts for activities that generated far more profit and required far more discretion. He wore a charcoal gray suit that cost more than most people earned in 6 months, the fabric cut so precisely it seemed to move with his body like liquid shadow. His dark hair was swept back from a face that managed to be both sharply handsome and coldly intimidating, with the kind of controlled features that revealed nothing while seeing everything. When he stood to acknowledge her arrival, his movements carried the fluid precision of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. "Your presence was unexpected, Mr. Kim," Zara said as she took her seat at the neutral position between both parties. The standard diplomatic protocols suggest this matter falls within normal representative parameters. "Perhaps," he replied, his voice carrying the faint accent that marked him as Seoul-born but internationally educated. "However, when territorial disputes involve new players establishing permanent presence in our district, I prefer to assess the situation personally." His dark eyes met hers across the polished wood table, and Zara felt something electric and entirely inappropriate pass between them. She had been in rooms with powerful men before, had stared down crime lords and Yakuza lieutenants without flinching, but there was something about Dae-ho's attention that felt different, dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with criminal violence and everything to do with the way her pulse quickened when he looked directly at her. The meeting proceeded according to standard mediation protocols, with both sides presenting their positions regarding shipping schedule conflicts and dock access rights. Zara guided the discussion with practiced efficiency, offering compromises that allowed each party to maintain face while resolving the underlying territorial issues. Throughout the 90-minute session, she remained acutely aware of Daeho's presence, the way he listened more than he spoke, the way his attention seemed to focus on her even when others were addressing him. When the formal proceedings concluded with a signed agreement establishing rotating dock access schedules, the representatives from both sides departed with the satisfied air of people who had achieved acceptable outcomes without violence. Zara began collecting her files, preparing to return to the community center for another late night of paperwork. "Ms. Williams," Daeho said as the last of the other participants exited the private dining room. "A moment of your time, if you would." She paused in her packing, acutely aware that they were now alone in the elegant space. The neutrality protocols were clear about post-mediation contact with syndicate leadership, but refusing to hear him out could create diplomatic complications that would ultimately make her job more difficult. "Of course, Mr. Kim. How may I assist you?" He moved closer to where she stood, not threateningly, but with the kind of measured approach that suggested careful consideration of boundaries. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that seemed to complement rather than mask his natural scent. This close, she could see the faint scar along his left temple that spoke of a past involving more direct forms of negotiation than boardroom meetings. "Your mediation skills are impressive," he said quietly. 3 years ago, disputes like tonight's would have resulted in bloodshed before any neutral party could intervene. The district has become considerably more stable since your appointment. I appreciate the recognition, but stability serves everyone's interests, Mr. Kim. Violence is expensive and draws unwanted attention from authorities who prefer to pretend our district regulates itself. Indeed. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. I wonder, however, if you have considered what happens when external forces threaten that stability. Forces that may not respect the neutrality protocols that give you your authority. Zara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the restaurant's air conditioning. If you have specific information about threats to district security, the proper protocol is to report them through official channels to the Commission. And if those channels prove inadequate to address certain types of threats, then the Commission will adapt our protocols accordingly. We have successfully mediated territorial disputes for 3 years without requiring syndicate intervention in our security. Daeho studied her face with an intensity that made her skin warm despite her professional composure. You are either remarkably naive about the realities of your position, Ms. Williams, or remarkably brave. I find myself hoping it is the latter. Before she could respond, he reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the table beside her files. The card was simple, expensive cardstock with only his name and a phone number embossed in silver lettering. When you realize that neutrality cannot protect you from every threat, call me. He turned and walked toward the exit with the same fluid grace that had marked his earlier movements, leaving Zara alone in the private dining room with her racing pulse and the unsettling certainty that her carefully maintained professional detachment had just suffered its first serious crack. She stared at the business card for a long moment before slipping it into her jacket pocket, telling herself it was simply prudent to maintain lines of communication with all major syndicate leaders. She gathered her files and headed for the exit, acutely aware that the night air felt different now, charged with possibilities that violated every protocol she had spent 3 years learning to navigate. As she walked toward her car, Zara caught her reflection in the restaurant's windows and saw something in her own eyes that she had never noticed before. Something that looked dangerously like hunger for complications she could not afford and attractions she absolutely could not pursue. 3 weeks had passed since the evening at Jumgang, and Zara Williams had managed to convince herself that her reaction to Kim Daeho was nothing more than professional curiosity about an unusually handsome syndicate leader. She had not used the business card he had given her, though she had not thrown it away either. It remained in her desk drawer at the community center, a small reminder of conversations that violated no protocols while somehow feeling like the most dangerous thing she had ever done. The call came on a Tuesday morning, another territorial dispute requiring formal mediation. This time, the conflict involved the Kim family's expanding import operations and the Okoro Collective's established shipping routes through Busan. What should have been a routine scheduling conflict had escalated when several containers belonging to the African merchants had been mysteriously delayed at customs, resulting in spoiled cargo and significant financial losses. Adora Okoro herself had requested the mediation, which told Zara that the collective considered this more than a simple miscommunication. The 60-year-old woman commanded one of the most sophisticated African criminal enterprises in East Asia, with operations spanning 3 countries and legitimate businesses that generated hundreds of millions in annual revenue. When Adora Okoro requested formal arbitration, smart people paid attention. The meeting was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the community center, in the main conference room that Zara had equipped with recording equipment and neutral seating arrangements designed to prevent any party from claiming positional advantage. She arrived early to review the files and prepare her mediation notes, following the same routine that had served her well through dozens of similar disputes. At precisely 2 o'clock, Adora Okoro arrived with 3 associates, including her nephew Marcus, who handled logistics for the collective's shipping operations. They were followed 5 minutes later by the Kim family representatives, and Zara felt her carefully maintained professional composure falter when she realized Kim Dae-ho had come personally once again. This marked the second time in 3 weeks that he had attended a routine mediation rather than sending his usual diplomatic team. Either the Kim family considered these territorial disputes more significant than they appeared, or Dae-ho had other reasons for involving himself directly in neutral arbitration processes. He wore a navy blue suit today, equally expensive as the charcoal gray from their previous meeting, with a white shirt and dark tie that somehow managed to look both conservative and predatory. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and when he took his seat across the conference table from the Okoro delegation, Zara found herself noticing the way his fingers moved as he arranged his papers, long and precise and entirely too distracting for someone trying to maintain professional objectivity. "Thank you all for coming," Zara began, settling into her chair at the head of the table. "We are here to address the shipping schedule conflicts that have affected both the Kim family import operations and the Okoro Collective's established routes through Busan. I have reviewed the preliminary reports from both parties, and I believe we can reach a satisfactory resolution through careful examination of the underlying logistics issues." The formal presentation proceeded according to standard protocols, with each side outlining their positions and providing documentation to support their claims. The Okoro Collective presented evidence of their long-standing shipping contracts and customs relationships, along with detailed records of the recent delays that had cost them nearly $200,000 in spoiled cargo. The Kim family representatives countered with documentation of their own expanding operations and the legitimate business growth that justified increased port access. Throughout the 90-minute discussion, Zara remained acutely aware of Kim Dae-ho's presence at the opposite end of the table. He spoke infrequently, but with the kind of quiet authority that commanded attention when he did choose to contribute. His dark eyes seemed to track her movements as she guided the negotiation, and twice she caught him watching her with an expression that had nothing to do with shipping schedules and everything to do with the inappropriate tension that had been building between them since their first meeting. When the formal session concluded with a preliminary agreement for rotating port access and shared customs liaison services, the Okoro delegation departed with expressions of satisfaction at the efficient resolution. Zara began collecting her files, expecting the Kim family representatives to follow suit, but found herself once again alone in the conference room with Dae-ho as his associates waited outside. "Twice in 3 weeks, Mr. Kim," she said without looking up from her paperwork. "Your personal involvement in routine territorial disputes is beginning to attract attention from my colleagues at the Commission. Perhaps my colleagues and I place different values on the importance of maintaining stable relationships with our African partners," he replied, moving closer to where she stood at the head of the conference table. "The Okoro Collective represents significant opportunities for legitimate business expansion, and I prefer to handle such matters personally rather than risk miscommunication through intermediaries." Zara looked up to find him standing close enough that she could see the faint lines around his eyes that spoke of a man accustomed to making decisions under pressure. This close, his cologne was even more noticeable, that expensive woodsy scent that seemed to suit him perfectly while making her uncomfortably aware of his physical presence. And yet your representatives have successfully handled similar negotiations for years without requiring your direct involvement, she observed. One might wonder what has changed to necessitate this new approach to syndicate diplomacy. Daeho studied her face with the same intensity she remembered from their previous encounter, as if he were trying to read something in her expression that she was not consciously revealing. You speak Korean like someone who learned it in university, Ms. Williams, but you understand our cultural nuances like someone who has lived here much longer than 3 years. I find myself curious about what brought you to Seoul and why you chose to dedicate yourself to maintaining peace between people who profit from conflict. The question caught her off guard, partly because it was more personal than anything they had discussed during their professional interactions, and partly because it forced her to confront motivations she rarely examined too closely. She had spent 3 years building her reputation as the neutral mediator, the person who stood above the various criminal enterprises that operated in Seoul's international district. Personal history was something she had deliberately kept separate from her professional identity. I believe in the possibility of cooperation over competition, Mr. Kim. Violence is expensive and unpredictable, while negotiated agreements create stable foundations for legitimate business growth. My background is less important than my ability to facilitate mutually beneficial outcomes. Atlanta, he said quietly, and Zara felt her stomach drop as she realized he had been investigating her background. You left Atlanta 18 months after witnessing the execution of 3 members of the Moretti family outside a restaurant in Little 5 Points. You moved to Seoul 6 months later and applied for the cultural liaison position with the commission within 2 weeks of your arrival. Zara felt her pulse accelerate as she processed the implications of his knowledge about her past. Few people in Seoul knew the specific circumstances that had brought her to Korea, and none of them should have shared that information with syndicate leaders without her consent. How do you know that? She asked, her voice steady despite the way her hands had begun to tremble slightly. Because I make it my business to know the background of anyone whose decisions affect the stability of my operations, he replied. And because someone else has also been investigating your history, someone whose interest in your past poses a considerably more serious threat than my curiosity. Before she could respond, Daeho reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a small piece of paper, placing it on the conference table between them. Zara looked down to see what appeared to be a note written in precise handwriting on expensive stationery. The black dove's wings will be clipped. Her blood ran cold as she stared at the message, understanding immediately that this was a threat directed specifically at her. The reference to a dove suggested someone who knew about her role as a neutral mediator, while the racial reference made clear that her identity had been thoroughly researched by whoever had sent this. Where did you get this? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was left on your car windshield yesterday evening while you were working late at the community center, Daeho said. My security team found it during their routine sweep of the district. The handwriting belongs to someone associated with the Sasaki clan, a Japanese syndicate that has been attempting to expand their operations into Korean territory for the past 6 months. Zara felt the room spinning slightly as she processed this information. The Sasaki clan was not part of the neutrality protocols that governed the Seoul International District. If they were targeting her directly, it meant they considered her mediation efforts an obstacle to their expansion plans. Why would Japanese syndicate operatives care about territorial disputes between Korean and African criminal enterprises? She asked, though part of her already suspected the answer. Because your successful mediation prevents the kind of territorial conflicts that would destabilize the district and create opportunities for outside intervention, Daeho replied. As long as the established syndicates maintain peaceful coexistence, new players cannot exploit existing tensions to establish their own footholds. You represent the primary obstacle to their expansion strategy. The implications of this information hit Zara like a physical blow. Everything she had worked to build over the past 3 years, all the careful relationship management and diplomatic protocols that had kept the district stable, was now painting a target on her back for criminal organizations that operated outside the system she understood. What do they want? She asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer to that question as well. They want you removed from your position, either through intimidation or more permanent measures, Daeho said. With the Neutrality Commission destabilized, territorial disputes will escalate into violence. existing alliances will fracture, and the Sasaki clan can move into the resulting power vacuum. Zara stared down at the threatening note, her mind racing through possible responses to this new information. The Commission had protocols for handling threats to neutral mediators, but those protocols were designed for conflicts between established district syndicates, not external threats from organizations that did not recognize neutrality agreements. "I need to report this to the Commission immediately," she said, reaching for her phone. "They will implement enhanced security protocols and contact law enforcement if necessary." Daeho's hand closed gently over hers, stopping her from dialing. The touch sent an entirely inappropriate surge of warmth through her despite the seriousness of the situation. "The Commission cannot protect you from the Sasaki clan, Ms. Williams. Their authority depends on the voluntary cooperation of syndicate leaders who benefit from territorial stability. Japanese Yakuza operatives do not recognize Korean neutrality agreements, and local law enforcement lacks the resources to provide adequate protection against professional assassins." "Then what do you suggest?" she asked, acutely aware that his hand was still covering hers and that she had not pulled away despite knowing she should. "Accept my protection while I eliminate this threat permanently," he said quietly. "Move into secured accommodations where my security team can ensure your safety while we locate and neutralize the Sasaki operatives before they can act on their intentions." Zara looked into his dark eyes and saw something that went beyond professional concern for district stability. She saw genuine worry for her personal safety, mixed with something that looked dangerously like possessive determination to keep her from harm. "That would compromise my neutral status and potentially invalidate every mediation decision I have made over the past 3 years," she replied, though her voice lacked the conviction she wished she could project. "If I accept protection from a syndicate leader, I cannot maintain the appearance of objectivity that gives me authority to mediate territorial disputes. And if you are dead, your authority becomes irrelevant," Daeho said bluntly. "The Sasaki clan does not make idle threats, Ms. Williams. They have killed neutral mediators before when those individuals posed obstacles to their expansion plans." Zara pulled her hand free from his and stepped back from the conference table, needing physical distance to think clearly about her options. Everything she had built in Seoul depended on her reputation for neutrality and objectivity. Accepting protection from Kim Daeho would destroy that reputation while potentially saving her life. "I need time to consider my options and consult with my colleagues at the Commission," she said finally. "This threat may be manageable through official channels without requiring syndicate intervention." Daeho studied her face for a long moment, and she could see that he understood her refusal despite disagreeing with it completely. "You have 48 hours, Ms. Williams. After that, I will implement protective measures whether you agree to them or not. The Sasaki clan does not make threats they do not intend to follow through on, and I will not allow them to eliminate you simply because you are too principled to accept help from someone whose methods you disapprove of." He moved toward the exit with the same fluid grace she remembered from their previous encounters, pausing at the door to look back at her one final time. "Keep the note as evidence for your Commission colleagues. And keep my phone number close. When you realize that neutrality cannot protect you from bullets, call me immediately." The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Zara alone in the conference room with the threatening note and the growing certainty that her carefully constructed professional life was about to become considerably more complicated than she had ever imagined possible. 46 hours after her conversation with Kim Daeho, Zara Williams discovered exactly how inadequate neutrality protocols were against determined enemies. She returned to her apartment in Hongdae at 11:30 on Thursday evening, exhausted from a day spent in emergency commission meetings discussing enhanced security measures that everyone knew would be insufficient against professional assassins. The door was still locked, but the subtle signs of entry were unmistakable to someone who had learned to recognize such things during her final months in Atlanta. A book shifted slightly on the shelf, a couch cushion pressed down just enough to show someone had sat there, and most telling of all, the faint scent of cigarettes in a space where no one smoked. Her laptop was gone from the desk where she had left it that morning, along with the external hard drive containing 3 years of mediation case files and contact information for every syndicate leader in the international district. In their place, arranged precisely in the center of her desk, sat a single origami crane folded from blood-red paper. Zara's hands trembled as she unfolded the delicate paper sculpture, revealing a message written in the same precise handwriting she had seen on the note Deho had shown her 2 days earlier. The dove has been caged. Her songs will soon be silenced forever. She backed toward the door, every instinct screaming that remaining in the apartment was dangerous beyond calculation. The Sasaki clan had violated her personal space, stolen her professional files, and made clear that their next move would be considerably more direct than threatening notes and cryptic origami. Her phone rang as she reached the hallway, the sound making her jump despite her attempt to maintain composure. The caller ID showed the number for the Commission's emergency hotline, and she answered with shaking fingers. Ms. Williams, this is Director Park. We have just received information that suggests you may be in immediate danger. Our sources indicate that foreign operatives have targeted you for elimination within the next 24 hours. I know, Zara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. They broke into my apartment and left another message. I need emergency protection protocols implemented immediately. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Director Park spoke again, his voice carried the weight of someone delivering news he did not want to share. I am afraid our emergency protocols are insufficient for this level of threat, Ms. Williams. The Commission was not designed to protect against foreign syndicate operations, and we lack the resources to provide adequate security against professional assassins. I must recommend that you contact local law enforcement and consider temporary relocation until this situation resolves itself. Zara closed her eyes, understanding finally that the Neutrality Commission that had given her 3 years of purpose and professional identity was powerless to protect her when she needed them most. The careful diplomatic protocols that govern territorial disputes between established syndicates meant nothing to external threats that operated outside the systems she understood. How long until this situation resolves itself, Director Park? That is difficult to predict, Ms. Williams. Foreign syndicate expansion plans can take months or years to complete, depending on the level of resistance they encounter from established territorial holders. The implication was clear. The Commission expected her to hide for months or possibly years while the Sasaki clan pursued their expansion plans. Her career as a neutral mediator would be effectively ended whether the assassins succeeded in killing her or merely succeeded in driving her into permanent hiding. Understood, Director Park. I will handle the situation through alternative channels. She ended the call and stood alone in the hallway outside her compromised apartment, finally accepting what Kim Dae-ho had tried to make her understand 2 days earlier. Neutrality could not protect her from enemies who did not recognize neutral authority, and the Commission that had given her purpose was powerless against threats that originated outside their diplomatic framework. Zara retrieved Dae-ho's business card from her purse and dialed the number with steady fingers, surprised by her own calm as she finally made the call she had been avoiding for 46 hours. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying no surprise at hearing from her despite the late hour. Ms. Williams, I assume this call indicates that the Commission's protective capabilities have proven inadequate to your current situation. They broke into my apartment and stole my files, she said without preamble. The Commission says they cannot provide adequate protection against foreign operatives, and local law enforcement lacks the resources to handle professional assassins. I believe you mentioned an alternative arrangement. Where are you now? Dae-ho asked, his voice shifting to the controlled urgency of someone accustomed to managing crisis situations. Standing in the hallway outside my apartment building. I did not feel safe remaining inside after discovering the break-in. Leave immediately and walk toward the main street. My security team will intercept you within 3 minutes and escort you to a secure location where we can discuss terms properly. Zara followed his instructions, walking quickly toward the busier streets of Hongdae, where the late-night crowds would provide some protection against immediate threats. True to his word, a black sedan pulled alongside the curb exactly 3 minutes after she ended the call, and 2 men in expensive suits gestured for her to enter the vehicle. The ride through Seoul's nighttime streets took 20 minutes, ending at what appeared to be a luxury office building in the Gangnam district. Her escorts led her through a private entrance to an elevator that required a key card to operate, rising to the top floor where the doors opened directly into what was clearly Kim Dae-ho's private office. The space was simultaneously elegant and intimidating, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, leather furniture that probably cost more than she earned in a year, and subtle technological equipment that suggested this was a place where serious business was conducted. Daeho stood behind a massive desk made of dark wood, still wearing the navy suit from their afternoon meeting, though his tie had been loosened and his sleeves rolled up in a way that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than more casual. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Williams. Please sit." He gestured toward a leather chair positioned across from his desk, and Zara settled into it with the strange sensation that she was about to negotiate terms for a future she had never imagined wanting. The office smelled of leather and expensive cologne, with undertones of something that might have been gun oil, reminding her that this was the private space of someone whose business interests extended far beyond legitimate real estate development. "I have spent the past 2 days researching the Sasaki clan's expansion timeline and operational methods," Daeho began without preamble. Based on their previous activities in Hong Kong and Singapore, they prefer to eliminate obstacles quickly and decisively rather than engage in prolonged intimidation campaigns. The break-in at your apartment represents their final warning before they move to direct action. "How much time do I have?" Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer was not nearly enough. "Perhaps 12 hours, possibly less if they have already positioned their operational team in Seoul. Professional assassins prefer to work during early morning hours when targets are most vulnerable and escape routes are most clear." Zara absorbed this information with the strange calm that comes from finally accepting the worst-case scenario. Everything she had built over the past 3 years was about to disappear, either because the Sasaki clan killed her or because accepting Kim Daeho's protection would destroy her reputation as a neutral mediator. "You mentioned an arrangement that would provide adequate security while allowing me to maintain some version of my professional identity," she said finally. "I need to understand exactly what you are proposing before I make any commitments that cannot be reversed." Daeho moved around his desk to stand closer to where she sat, his movements carrying the same controlled precision she had noticed during their previous encounters. This close, she could see the intensity in his dark eyes, the way his attention focused on her completely, as if nothing else in the world mattered beyond her safety and her answer. "I am proposing a temporary protective arrangement with specific terms and timelines," he said, his voice carrying the formal tone of someone conducting serious business negotiations. "You would relocate to secure accommodations within my family's primary compound, where our security systems and personnel can ensure your complete safety from external threats. In exchange for accepting this protection, you would receive financial compensation of $200,000, paid in quarterly installments to accounts of your choosing." Zara felt her breath catch as she processed the amount he had named. $200,000 was more than she earned in 3 years as a cultural liaison, enough money to rebuild her life anywhere in the world if her career as a neutral mediator ended permanently. "What would be expected of me in exchange for this arrangement?" she asked, needing to understand the full scope of what he was proposing. "You would continue your work with the Neutrality Commission from secure facilities within the compound, conducting mediation sessions via video conference and maintaining your professional relationships with all established syndicate leaders. Your quarters would be completely separate from my personal residence, with independent access and privacy that ensures no appearance of personal involvement. My security team would provide protection without interfering in your professional activities." "And what would you require from me beyond accepting this protection?" Zara asked, aware that no arrangement of this magnitude came without corresponding obligations. "Absolute confidentiality regarding the compound's layout, security measures, and the identity of other individuals who may require temporary protection," Daeho replied. "Complete transparency regarding any contact from the Sasaki clan or other external threats. And recognition that for the duration of this arrangement, your safety is my responsibility, which means accepting security protocols even when they conflict with your personal preferences." Zara studied his face, trying to read the motivations behind this elaborate offer. The financial compensation was generous to the point of seeming almost secondary, while the security arrangements were comprehensive enough to suggest he was taking her protection seriously as a personal obligation rather than simply a business transaction. What happens if I violate the confidentiality requirements or attempt to leave the arrangement before the threat is eliminated? She asked. Then you forfeit the financial compensation and assume full responsibility for your own security, he said without hesitation. However, if you fulfill the terms of our agreement until the Sasaki threat is permanently eliminated, you will receive the full compensation amount along with documentation that clears your reputation of any suggestions of bias or improper syndicate relationships. How long do you estimate it will take to eliminate this threat permanently? 6 weeks, possibly less if the Sasaki operatives can be located and neutralized quickly. Definitely no more than 3 months, as extended foreign operations become exponentially more expensive and difficult to maintain without local support. Zara closed her eyes and forced herself to consider her realistic alternatives. She could attempt to disappear on her own, abandoning her career and living in hiding for an indefinite period while the Sasaki clan pursued their expansion plans. She could accept law enforcement protection that everyone acknowledged would be inadequate against professional assassins. Or she could accept Kim Daeho's offer, temporarily compromising her neutral status in exchange for genuine security and financial compensation that would allow her to rebuild her career when the immediate threat ended. What guarantees do I have that this arrangement will actually remain temporary? She asked, voicing the concern that worried her most about entering his orbit. How do I know you will not extend the timeline or modify the terms once I am dependent on your protection? Daeho returned to his desk and withdrew a thick document from one of the drawers, placing it on the leather surface between them. The papers appeared to be a formal contract, with multiple pages of detailed terms and conditions printed on expensive letterhead. Everything I have proposed is documented in this agreement, including specific timelines, compensation schedules, and termination conditions, he said. The contract includes penalty clauses that would cost me significantly more than $200,000 if I attempt to extend the arrangement beyond the agreed timeline or modify the terms without your written consent. Additionally, copies of this document will be held by neutral third parties who have instructions to contact law enforcement if you fail to make scheduled check-in calls. Zara leaned forward to examine the contract, impressed despite herself by the comprehensive detail and legal protections it contained. This was not a hastily improvised offer, but a carefully planned arrangement that addressed every concern she might reasonably have about entering into such an agreement with someone whose business interests included activities that existed outside legal boundaries. Why are you willing to go to such elaborate lengths to protect someone you barely know? She asked, looking up to meet his eyes. The resources you are proposing to commit are far beyond anything justified by maintaining district stability. Daeho was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his response carefully. When he spoke, his voice carried an honesty that caught her completely off guard. Because 3 years ago, I watched the Sasaki clan eliminate a neutral mediator in Hong Kong, a woman whose only crime was successfully preventing territorial conflicts that would have served their expansion plans. I was building business relationships there at the time and could have intervened, but I chose not to become involved in what I considered a local political matter. She died because people like me decided that protecting neutral mediators was not our responsibility. The pain in his voice was unmistakable, and Zara realized she was seeing past the controlled criminal leader to someone who carried genuine guilt about a past failure to act when action might have saved a life. You see yourself as having a second chance to do what you should have done 3 years ago, she said quietly. Perhaps. Or perhaps I simply refuse to allow talented people to be eliminated by foreign criminals who do not respect the careful balances that keep our district stable and profitable for everyone involved. Zara looked down at the contract again, reading through provisions that were more comprehensive and protective than anything she could have negotiated for herself. The financial compensation alone would give her complete freedom to rebuild her career anywhere in the world when this situation ended. More importantly, the security arrangements would actually keep her alive long enough to have a career to rebuild. I need your answer now, Ms. Williams, Daeho said gently. The Sasaki operatives will begin their final approach within hours, and implementing adequate protective measures requires time that we no longer have. She picked up the expensive pen he had placed beside the contract and signed her name on the designated line, committing herself to an arrangement that violated every principle of neutrality she had spent 3 years learning to navigate. As the ink dried, Zara realized she had just traded her carefully constructed professional independence for genuine protection from someone whose methods she might not approve of, but whose commitment to her safety felt more reliable than any alternative currently available to her. "Welcome to the Kim family compound, Ms. Williams," Daeho said as he countersigned the contract. "I promise you will find our accommodations considerably more comfortable than hiding from assassins would have been." The Kim family compound occupied 6 acres in Seoul's exclusive Pyeongchangdong district, hidden behind high walls and sophisticated security systems that made it feel less like a residence and more like a fortified embassy. Zara's quarters were located in the east wing of the main building, a spacious suite that included a sitting room, bedroom, private bathroom, and small kitchenette that had clearly been designed for long-term guests who valued both comfort and independence. The accommodations were luxurious beyond anything she had experienced, with heated marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking private gardens, and furnishings that managed to be both elegant and welcoming. Her laptop had been replaced with a high-end computer system that provided secure access to commission databases, and her suite included video conferencing equipment that allowed her to conduct mediation sessions without leaving the compound's protected perimeter. For the first 3 days, Zara barely saw Kim Daeho despite living in his family's ancestral home. She conducted her commission work from the secure office space he had provided, participating in video mediation sessions and maintaining her professional relationships while gradually adapting to the strange reality of being protected by the same syndicate leaders she had previously observed from careful diplomatic distance. It was on Thursday evening that he knocked on her door, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing dark slacks with a white dress shirt that somehow made him look more approachable than the expensive suits she had grown accustomed to seeing him wear during their professional interactions. "I thought you might appreciate some company for dinner," he said when she opened the door. "The kitchen staff has prepared Korean barbecue, and I believe isolation can become counterproductive when extended indefinitely." Zara hesitated, acutely aware that sharing meals fell outside the professional boundaries she had been trying to maintain despite the intimate circumstances of living under his protection. At the same time, she had spent 3 days alone in luxurious quarters that felt increasingly like an elegant prison, and the prospect of conversation with someone who understood the complexities of her situation was genuinely appealing. "That would be nice," she said finally, stepping aside to allow him into her sitting room. "I admit I have been feeling somewhat disconnected from normal social interaction." The dining area of her suite had been set with fine china and silverware that probably cost more than she had earned in her first month as a cultural liaison. The meal that arrived shortly after Daeho's invitation included perfectly grilled beef, an array of traditional side dishes, and fresh rice that filled the space with comfortable domestic aromas that reminded her how long it had been since she had shared a proper meal with anyone. "How are you finding the accommodations?" he asked as they settled into chairs across from each other at the small dining table. "I wanted to ensure you had everything necessary for both comfort and professional productivity." "Everything is perfect," Zara replied, accepting the glass of wine he poured for her. "The video conferencing setup is actually more advanced than what I had access to at the commission offices, and I have been able to maintain all my scheduled mediation sessions without any disruption to the participants." They ate in comfortable silence for several minutes, and Zara found herself studying his face in the softer lighting of her suite. Away from the formal atmosphere of conference rooms and restaurants, Daeho seemed less intimidating and more genuinely approachable, though the underlying intensity that marked him as someone accustomed to command remained present in everything from his posture to the way he observed her responses to his questions. "Tell me about cultural mediation," he said as they finished the main course. "Your success rate with territorial disputes is remarkable, but I suspect your methods involve more than simply facilitating communication between opposing parties. It is mostly about understanding that every conflict has layers that are not immediately visible," Zara explained, surprised by how much she enjoyed having someone ask intelligent questions about her work. Surface disputes about shipping schedules or territorial access usually reflect deeper concerns about respect, security, or long-term business viability. Successful mediation requires identifying those underlying issues and addressing them directly rather than simply negotiating superficial compromises. And you learned these skills in university or through practical experience with criminal organizations? The question was casual enough, but Zara sensed genuine curiosity behind it rather than simple polite conversation. She found herself wanting to share more about her background than professional necessity required, despite the warning voice in her mind that reminded her to maintain appropriate boundaries with someone whose protection she depended on. I learned the basics in university, but practical application came from necessity, she said carefully. Atlanta has its own version of territorial disputes between different criminal enterprises, and I discovered I had an aptitude for helping people find common ground even when their initial positions seemed irreconcilable. What brought you to Seoul specifically? Daeho asked, pouring more wine for both of them. Cultural mediation opportunities exist in many international cities, but you chose Korea despite having no apparent family connections or previous business relationships here. Zara hesitated, aware that answering honestly would require sharing information about her past that she had carefully avoided discussing with anyone in Seoul. At the same time, something about the intimate atmosphere of sharing dinner in her private quarters made her reluctant to continue the professional distance she had maintained during their previous interactions. I needed to be somewhere that had no connection to my life in Atlanta, she said finally. Sometimes starting over requires geographic distance from everything that came before. The Moretti family execution, he said quietly, and she realized he already knew the answer to his question, but wanted to hear her version of events that had driven her to leave everything familiar behind. You saw 3 men killed in front of a restaurant where you were having dinner with friends, he continued when she did not immediately respond. The shooters were never caught, and you received anonymous warnings that witnesses to the execution were not considered safe in Atlanta. You left the United States 6 months later and chose Seoul because it was far enough away to ensure no remaining connections to the people who might consider you a liability. Zara stared at him across the small dining table, processing the fact that he knew details about her past that she had never shared with anyone, including her colleagues at the commission. The knowledge should have felt like a violation of her privacy, but instead it felt strangely like relief to have someone understand why she had needed to rebuild her entire life from nothing. How much do you know about that night? She asked quietly. Enough to understand why you dedicated yourself to preventing violence rather than simply avoiding it, Daeho replied. Witnessing executions changes people in ways that cannot be easily predicted or controlled. Some individuals develop post-traumatic stress that makes normal life impossible, while others discover they have the strength to build something positive from their worst experiences. Which category do I fall into? She asked, though she suspected he had already formed an opinion about her psychological response to trauma. You chose to become someone who prevents the kind of territorial conflicts that lead to executions, he said, his dark eyes meeting hers across the table. That suggests remarkable psychological resilience combined with a strong ethical foundation that survived contact with the worst aspects of human nature. The conversation shifted to lighter topics as they finished dinner, but Zara remained acutely aware that something fundamental had changed between them. He had seen past her professional competence to understand the personal history that drove her commitment to peaceful conflict resolution, while she had begun to see past his criminal authority to recognize someone who understood trauma and recovery from personal experience. When he stood to leave nearly 2 hours later, Daeho paused at the door to her suite and looked back with an expression that seemed to carry more weight than simple polite gratitude for her company. Thank you for sharing dinner with me, Ms. Williams. I hope we can continue these conversations while you're staying here. Isolation is never beneficial for people who are accustomed to meaningful work and social interaction. After he left, Zara found herself unable to concentrate on the commission reports she had planned to review that evening. Instead, she stood at her floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the compound's private gardens, trying to process the shift in her perception of someone she had spent weeks thinking of as a dangerous criminal leader whose protection she needed, but whose methods she could never approve of. The pattern continued over the following weeks, with shared meals becoming a regular occurrence that gradually evolved from polite professional conversation to genuine personal connection. Daeho proved to be surprisingly well-educated about international politics and cultural anthropology, with insights into Asian business practices that enhanced her understanding of the syndicate relationships she mediated through video conferences from his secure facilities. More unexpectedly, he demonstrated genuine interest in her mediation techniques, often asking detailed questions about how she identified underlying motivations and built trust between parties who had previously considered each other threats. During one particularly lengthy dinner conversation, he admitted that observing her negotiation methods had given him new approaches to managing conflicts within his own organization. "You make cooperation seem more profitable than competition," he said as they shared wine and Korean pastries in her sitting room. "That is a perspective that could revolutionize how syndicate leaders approach territorial expansion and legitimate business development." "Cooperation is more profitable than competition," Zara replied, enjoying the way his attention focused on her when she explained concepts that had become second nature through 3 years of practical application. "Violence is expensive, unpredictable, and draws unwanted attention from authorities. Negotiated agreements create stable foundations for long-term growth that benefit everyone involved. And yet most criminal organizations default to intimidation and violence when they encounter obstacles to their expansion plans. Because intimidation and violence provide immediate results that seem simpler than the patient relationship building that creates lasting solutions," she explained. "Most people underestimate how much time and effort successful cooperation requires, so they choose short-term tactics that create long-term problems." It was during their 3rd week of regular dinner conversations that Daeho's carefully maintained composure cracked enough to reveal the personal history that explained his protective intensity toward anyone threatened by foreign criminal organizations. They had been discussing the Commission's response to her temporary absence when he mentioned almost casually that his younger brother had been killed by Sasaki operatives in Hong Kong 2 years earlier. "Kim Min-jun was 26 when they murdered him," Daeho said, his voice carrying a flatness that suggested he was working to control stronger emotions. "He was in Hong Kong establishing a technology partnership that would have expanded our legitimate business operations into software development and digital security services. The Sasaki clan considered our expansion a threat to their own technology investments, so they eliminated him during what was supposed to be a simple business meeting." Zara felt her heart contract as she watched pain flicker across his features despite his obvious attempt to maintain professional detachment while discussing his brother's murder. This explained the intensity with which he had responded to her situation, the comprehensive protective measures that went far beyond what business necessity would require. "I am so sorry," she said quietly. "No one should lose family to territorial disputes that could have been resolved through negotiation. I was too focused on expanding our legitimate operations to recognize how seriously the Sasaki clan viewed our activities as competition," Daeho continued, his dark eyes staring past her toward something only he could see. "Min-jun had requested additional security for the Hong Kong meetings, but I considered his concerns excessive. I thought our legitimate business partnerships would protect him from criminal violence." "You could not have predicted they would resort to murder over technology investments," Zara said, recognizing the guilt that drove his current protective behavior. "International business competition does not normally escalate to assassination. It does when one party operates outside legal boundaries while the other assumes everyone follows the same rules," he replied. "My brother believed in building bridges between legitimate business and reformed criminal organizations. The Sasaki clan killed him for that optimism." The silence that followed was heavy with shared understanding of how violence could destroy people whose only mistake was believing in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. Zara found herself reaching across the small space between their chairs to touch his hand, offering comfort to someone whose protective intensity suddenly made complete sense. "You are trying to save me because you could not save him," she said softly. "Perhaps," Daeho admitted, his fingers closing around hers in a way that sent entirely inappropriate warmth through her despite the serious nature of their conversation. "Or perhaps I simply refuse to allow the Sasaki clan to eliminate another person whose work creates the kind of stability that makes legitimate business possible." The physical contact lasted only a few seconds before both of them pulled back, but Zara remained acutely aware of how natural it had felt to touch him and how reluctant she had been to break that connection. Something was developing between them that went far beyond professional respect or situational alliance. Something that violated every protocol she had spent 3 years learning to navigate. Over the following days, their interactions took on a domestic quality that made her hyper-aware of the growing attraction she was struggling to ignore. Daeho began joining her for breakfast as well as dinner, sharing sections of Korean newspapers and helping her practice pronunciation of particularly difficult phrases she needed for commission video conferences. She found herself cooking simple Southern comfort food in her suite's kitchenette, sharing dishes that reminded him of his travels in the American South and created unexpected moments of cultural connection. The shift from professional distance to personal intimacy should have concerned her more than it did. Instead, Zara discovered that she looked forward to their conversations with an intensity that had nothing to do with gratitude for his protection and everything to do with genuine attraction to his intelligence, his unexpected gentleness, and the way he listened to her ideas as if they mattered beyond their immediate practical applications. It was during their 4th week at the compound that Director Park called her personal phone with news that threatened to destroy everything she had been trying to preserve about her professional reputation and future career prospects. Ms. Williams, we have received anonymous photographs showing you in close proximity to Kim Daeho at what appears to be a private residence, he said without preamble. These images suggest a personal relationship that would compromise your ability to serve as a neutral mediator for disputes involving the Kim family syndicate. Zara felt her stomach drop as she processed the implications of what Director Park was telling her. Someone had been surveilling the compound and had captured evidence that could be interpreted as proof of bias or inappropriate involvement with one of the primary syndicate leaders she was supposed to mediate disputes for. The photographs were taken during a routine security briefing in Mr. Kim's office, she replied, choosing her words carefully. My temporary relocation was necessitated by credible threats from foreign operatives, and I have maintained appropriate professional boundaries throughout this security arrangement. The images suggest otherwise, Ms. Williams. Several photographs show you and Mr. Kim in what appears to be intimate conversation during evening hours, with body language that indicates personal familiarity rather than professional interaction. Director Park's voice carried the disappointed tone of someone who had trusted her judgment and felt betrayed by evidence of what appeared to be serious ethical violations. Zara realized that regardless of the actual nature of her relationship with Daeho, the photographs would be interpreted as evidence of bias that invalidated every mediation decision she had made over the past 3 years. I need to review these images before I can provide a complete response to your concerns, she said finally. Please forward copies to my secure email address so I can assess the accuracy of your interpretation. That will not be necessary, Ms. Williams. The Commission has voted to suspend your mediator credentials pending a full investigation of potential ethical violations related to your current living arrangements. You are expected to return to Seoul immediately and submit to questioning about the nature of your relationship with Kim Daeho. The call ended before she could respond, leaving Zara alone in her luxurious quarters with the devastating realization that her career as a neutral mediator was effectively over regardless of whether she survived the Sasaki clan's assassination attempts. She had traded her professional independence for physical safety, and now she was losing both as external forces beyond her control manipulated the situation to eliminate her influence over territorial stability in Seoul's international district. When Daeho arrived for their scheduled dinner that evening, he took one look at her face and immediately understood that something had fundamentally changed in their carefully balanced arrangement. What happened? He asked, moving closer to where she sat in her chair by the window overlooking the compound's gardens. The Commission has suspended my credentials based on surveillance photographs that suggest inappropriate personal involvement with you, Zara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. I am expected to return to Seoul immediately for questioning about ethical violations that could permanently end my career as a neutral mediator. Daeho's expression shifted to something cold and dangerous that reminded her exactly who she was dealing with beneath the cultured exterior and unexpected domesticity they had shared over the past month. The Sasaki clan is using your professional reputation to accomplish what their assassination attempts could not, he said quietly. They are forcing you to choose between physical safety and career survival, knowing that either choice eliminates your influence over territorial mediation in the international district. Which means they have succeeded regardless of what I decide, Zara said, finally accepting that everything she had worked to build over the past 3 years was gone. I cannot return to Seoul while foreign assassins are actively hunting me, but I cannot maintain my mediator credentials while living under syndicate protection. My career is over either way. Daeho studied her face for a long moment, and she could see him weighing options with the strategic calculation of someone accustomed to finding solutions to seemingly impossible problems. No, he said finally, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of someone who had just made a decision that would change everything. Your career as a neutral mediator may be ending, but that does not mean your career in conflict resolution has to end. The Sasaki clan will be eliminated permanently within the next 48 hours, and when they are gone, you will have options you have not yet considered. The promise in his voice was unmistakable, as was the implication that he was about to take action that would solve her immediate safety concerns while potentially creating new complications that she could not yet anticipate. Zara looked into his dark eyes and saw something that went far beyond professional obligation or business necessity, something that looked dangerously like personal commitment to her future regardless of what that future might cost him to secure. What kind of options? She asked quietly, though part of her already suspected the answer would change everything between them in ways she was not certain she was prepared to handle. The kind that would make you mine permanently rather than temporarily, he replied, his voice carrying an intensity that made her pulse accelerate despite everything else she was trying to process. But first, I need to eliminate the people who think they can destroy your life and walk away without consequences. The commission's official vote came at 9:15 the following morning, delivered through a brief call from Director Park that contained no surprises but carried the weight of finality that Zara had been dreading since the surveillance photographs surfaced. Ms. Williams, the commission has voted unanimously to revoke your mediation credentials effective immediately, he said with the formal tone of someone reading from prepared remarks. Your association with Kim Daeho represents an irreconcilable conflict of interest that invalidates your ability to serve as a neutral arbiter of territorial disputes. You are hereby barred from conducting any official mediation activities under Commission authority. The call ended without opportunity for response or appeal, leaving Zara staring at her phone with the strange numbness that comes from watching everything you have worked to build disappear in the space of 30 seconds. 3 years of careful relationship management, successful territorial agreements, and professional reputation had been wiped away by anonymous photographs and political maneuvering designed to eliminate her influence over district stability. She was still processing the full implications of her professional destruction when the compound's alarm system activated at 11:30, filling the air with sharp electronic warnings that indicated immediate security threats. Through her floor-to-ceiling windows, Zara could see members of Daeho's security team moving with urgent precision across the grounds, taking defensive positions around the main building while communicating through earpieces that suggested coordinated response to a developing crisis. Her suite's intercom crackled to life with Daeho's voice, controlled but carrying an edge of tension that made clear this was not a routine security drill. Ms. Williams, please remain in your quarters and away from windows until further notice. We are implementing lockdown protocols due to unauthorized personnel attempting to breach the compound perimeter. Zara moved away from the windows, but found herself unable to simply wait passively while others handled a threat that she understood was ultimately directed at her. The Sasaki operatives had come to finish what their psychological warfare campaign had started, and hiding in her luxurious quarters while men risked their lives defending her felt like the kind of helpless civilian response she had never been comfortable accepting. She opened her door despite direct instructions to remain secured and moved quickly through the compound's east wing toward the main security center, guided by 3 years of observing how criminal organizations coordinated defensive operations during territorial conflicts. If the Sasaki clan was mounting a direct assault, successful defense would require precise knowledge of their approach routes and tactical capabilities, information that might be available from the compound's sophisticated surveillance systems. The security center occupied a windowless room in the building's core, filled with monitors displaying feeds from cameras positioned throughout the 6-acre compound. Daeho stood before a wall of screens wearing dark tactical clothing instead of his usual expensive suits, coordinating defensive positions through a headset while monitoring the movements of at least a dozen figures approaching through the wooded areas surrounding the property. "What are you doing here?" he asked when he noticed her presence, his voice sharp with concern that went beyond simple operational security. "I specifically instructed you to remain in your quarters until this situation is resolved. You need someone who understands how the Sasaki clan coordinates tactical operations," Zara replied, moving closer to the surveillance monitors. "I studied their methods extensively during my commission research, and I can identify their probable approach patterns based on the terrain and building layout. This is not a mediation session, Ms. Williams. These are professional assassins conducting a military-style assault with the specific objective of killing you before my security team can mount effective resistance. Which is exactly why you need every tactical advantage available," she said firmly, pointing to one of the exterior monitors that showed 3 figures moving through the compound's northern gardens. "They are using standard infiltration techniques designed for urban environments with limited cover. Their approach assumes you will concentrate defensive positions around the main building while they circle to attack from unexpected directions." Daeho followed her gaze to the monitor, then looked back at her with an expression that seemed to recognize something he had not previously acknowledged about her capabilities under pressure. "What do you see that my security team missed?" "They are dividing into 2 groups to create the impression of a pincer movement from north and south," Zara explained, studying the tactical display with analytical focus she had not realized she possessed. "But the real assault will come from the west, where they have positioned their primary strike team to exploit the blind spot created by your defensive concentration on the obvious approach routes." She was right. Within minutes, the compound's western perimeter sensors detected the main Sasaki assault force moving through terrain that would have been undefended if Daeho had not redirected his security team based on her tactical assessment. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes, with professional efficiency that spoke to months of preparation on both sides. From the security center, Zara watched Daeho coordinate his team's response with the same controlled intensity she had observed during business negotiations, except now he was directing violence with lethal precision instead of managing territorial compromises. When the Sasaki cell leader was identified attempting to breach the main building's eastern entrance, Daeho left the security center personally to intercept the threat. The encounter lasted less than 3 minutes. When it ended, the compound's grounds were silent except for the sound of Daeho's security team conducting systematic sweeps to ensure no remaining threats. Zara remained at the surveillance monitors, watching feeds that showed the aftermath of professional violence conducted with mechanical efficiency designed to eliminate problems rather than send messages. Daeho returned to the security center 20 minutes later, still wearing the tactical clothing that now carried evidence of direct combat. His dark hair was disheveled, and there was something different in his expression, something that looked like the aftermath of decisions that could not be undone. "It is finished," he said quietly, removing his headset and setting it aside with movements that seemed heavier than his usual fluid precision. "The Sasaki operatives are eliminated, and their support network in Seoul has been neutralized. You are no longer in immediate physical danger from foreign assassination attempts." Zara looked into his eyes and saw something raw and unguarded that he had never allowed her to see during their previous interactions. The controlled criminal leader had been replaced by someone who had just killed people to protect her, and the weight of that violence was written across his features despite his obvious effort to maintain professional composure. "How many people died because of me?" she asked quietly. 7 Sasaki operatives and 3 support personnel," he replied without hesitation. "All of them were professional killers whose elimination makes Seoul safer for everyone who values territorial stability over violent expansion." She should have felt horror at the death toll that had resulted from protecting her life. Instead, Zara found herself feeling profound gratitude towards someone who had been willing to commit violence she could never approve of in order to ensure she lived to disapprove of it. "You killed the cell leader personally," she said, not asking but acknowledging what she had understood from watching the surveillance feeds. "Yes, the man who murdered my brother in Hong Kong. The man who came here to murder you. He died by my hand, and I would make the same choice again without hesitation." The honesty in his voice was absolute, as was the implication that he had crossed lines for her that he could never uncross. Zara moved closer to where he stood beside the security monitors, close enough to see the faint tremor in his hands that suggested even professional killers were affected by the necessity of taking lives. "I am sorry you had to do that," she said softly. "I know it cost you something, even if it was necessary." "It cost me nothing compared to what losing you would have cost," Deho replied, his voice carrying an intensity that made her pulse accelerate despite the serious nature of their conversation. "I could not protect Minjun from the Sasaki clan, but I was not going to fail to protect you." The admission hung between them like a bridge they could choose to cross or walk away from, but could not ignore. Zara looked into his dark eyes and saw something that went far beyond professional obligation or business necessity, something that looked like genuine need for her to understand that her safety had become more important to him than maintaining appropriate boundaries. "You did not fail your brother," she said, reaching out to touch his face with fingers that trembled slightly as they made contact with his skin. "You could not have predicted the Sasaki clan would resort to murder over legitimate business competition. And you did not deserve to lose your career because I was too selfish to maintain proper distance while protecting you," he replied, his hand covering hers where it rested against his cheek. "Your professional reputation was destroyed because I wanted your company more than I wanted to preserve your neutrality." The physical contact sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the attraction she had been fighting for weeks. Standing in the aftermath of violence that had been conducted specifically to keep her alive, Zara finally acknowledged what she had been trying to deny since their first dinner conversation in her quarters. "I wanted your company too," she admitted quietly. "More than I wanted to preserve professional distance. More than I should have wanted anything that violated neutrality protocols." Deho's other hand moved to her waist, pulling her closer with careful deliberation that gave her opportunity to resist if she chose to. When she instead stepped into his embrace, he leaned down to kiss her with intensity that carried weeks of suppressed attraction and the profound relief of someone who had just ensured the safety of something precious. The kiss lasted until they both needed to breathe, and when they separated, Zara saw in his expression the same recognition that was flooding through her own consciousness. Everything that had existed between them previously had been transformed by shared violence and mutual admission of feelings that could no longer be denied or managed through professional protocols. "You are mine now," he said against her lips, his voice carrying possessive certainty that should have alarmed her, but instead felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Treaty or no treaty. Commission credentials or no credentials. You belong with me. And you are mine," she replied, her hands fisting in his tactical shirt as she pulled him closer. "Forbidden or not forbidden. Criminal or legitimate. I choose you over every protocol I have ever learned to follow." The declaration sealed something between them that went beyond temporary protective arrangements or situational alliances. In the security center surrounded by evidence of violence that had been committed to ensure her survival, Zara Williams officially abandoned her career as a neutral mediator in favor of something that felt infinitely more valuable and considerably more dangerous than anything she had ever chosen before. 6 weeks after the Sasaki assault, Zara Williams stood in Kim Deho's private office overlooking Seoul's business district, reading news reports that validated everything she had suspected about the Commission's failure to protect neutral mediators from external threats. The headlines told a story of systematic corruption, foreign infiltration, and political manipulation that had nothing to do with her relationship with Deho and everything to do with institutional failures that had been years in the making. Neutrality Commission dissolved following investigation into foreign bribery scandal, read the main article in the Korea Herald. Evidence revealed that Director Park and 3 senior commissioners had accepted substantial payments from Japanese syndicate operatives in exchange for manipulating territorial mediation decisions to favor foreign expansion into established Korean criminal enterprises. The investigation had been triggered by documents recovered from the eliminated Sasaki operatives, documents that proved the Commission had been compromised long before Zara had ever met Deho. Her suspension and credential revocation had been part of a coordinated campaign to destabilize Korean territorial control, using manufactured ethics violations to remove the one mediator whose success rate threatened foreign expansion plans. It appears your professional reputation has been officially vindicated, Deho said as he joined her at the floor-to-ceiling windows. The government investigation concluded that you were the only commission member who had not accepted foreign bribes or participated in manipulating mediation outcomes for political purposes. Zara looked up from the newspaper to find him watching her with the same intensity she had grown accustomed to over the past month, though now that intensity carried undertones of satisfaction and something that might have been pride in her vindication. Unfortunately, official vindication does not restore a career with an organization that no longer exists, she replied, though without the bitterness such a statement would have carried 6 weeks earlier. The Commission's dissolution eliminates any possibility of returning to my previous role as a neutral territorial mediator. Which brings me to a proposition I have been considering for several weeks, Deho said, moving to his desk and withdrawing a thick folder of documents. The Kim family enterprises are expanding our legitimate international business operations, and we require someone with your mediation skills and cultural expertise to serve as our primary liaison for cross-border partnerships and conflict resolution. Zara felt her pulse accelerate as she processed the implications of what he was suggesting. This was not an offer of continued protection or temporary arrangements, but a proposal for legitimate employment that would utilize her professional skills while allowing them to work together without violating any ethical protocols. What type of international operations? She asked, moving closer to examine the documents he had spread across his desk. Technology partnerships with African companies, shipping agreements with American firms, and real estate development projects that require coordination between multiple cultural and business frameworks, he explained, pointing to contracts and financial projections that represented millions of dollars in legitimate business expansion. The position would be officially titled Director of International Relations, with a starting salary of $300,000 annually plus equity participation in successful ventures. The amount was staggering, nearly 3 times what she had earned in her entire career as a commission mediator. More importantly, the scope of work represented exactly the kind of cross-cultural bridge building that had drawn her to mediation in the first place. Except now she would be facilitating cooperation for legitimate business growth rather than preventing violence between criminal organizations. This would be entirely legal and above board, she asked, needing absolute clarity about the nature of what he was proposing. Completely legitimate, with all activities conducted through licensed corporations that are subject to government oversight and international business regulations, Deho replied. The Kim family has been transitioning toward legitimate enterprises for the past 3 years, and your expertise in cultural mediation represents exactly the kind of professional leadership we need to complete that transformation successfully. Zara studied the contracts and business plans spread across his desk, recognizing the comprehensive scope of a criminal organization's systematic evolution into legitimate international commerce. This was not simple money laundering or front company operations, but genuine business development that would create jobs, generate tax revenue, and establish the Kim family as respected participants in legal economic activity. You are asking me to help you go completely legitimate, she said, understanding finally what he had been building toward since their first conversation at the compound. I am asking you to build something with me that combines your mediation skills with my business resources to create opportunities that benefit everyone involved, he replied. Legitimate international commerce that provides stability and prosperity without requiring anyone to operate outside legal boundaries. The offer was everything she could have hoped for professionally, but Zara sensed there was more to his proposition than simply employment opportunities and career advancement. The intensity in his dark eyes suggested personal motivations that went beyond business partnerships and legitimate enterprise development. Is this a job offer or something more comprehensive? She asked quietly. It is both, Deho said, moving around his desk to stand directly in front of her. I am offering you a career that utilizes your talents while asking you to build a life with me that makes both of us stronger than we could ever be individually. He reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring that managed to be both elegant and substantial, with a diamond that caught the afternoon light streaming through the office windows. Marry me, Zara. Not because circumstances forced us together, but because we choose to build something together that is better than anything either of us could create alone. Be my wife, my business partner, and the person who helps transform everything my family has built into something worthy of the woman I want to spend my life protecting and cherishing. Zara stared at the ring, processing the magnitude of what he was offering. This was not just marriage, but complete transformation of both their lives, combining her mediation expertise with his business acumen to create legitimate success that honored her values while providing him with the respectability that legitimate enterprise could offer. "You want to build an empire together?" she said softly. "I want to build a future together," he replied, taking her hands in his. "One where your skills create cooperation instead of preventing violence, where my resources support legitimate growth instead of territorial control, where we use everything we have learned about power and negotiation to build something that benefits everyone involved." The proposal represented everything she had never dared to hope for. Meaningful work that utilized her talents, financial security that eliminated survival concerns, and partnership with someone who understood both her strengths and her values. More than that, it offered transformation of forbidden attraction into the foundation for legitimate success that violated no protocols because they would be writing their own rules. "I choose you over protocol," she said, extending her hand to accept the ring. "I choose love over rules, partnership over neutrality, building something together over maintaining professional distance." Daeho slipped the ring onto her finger with movements that carried the same controlled precision she had observed during business negotiations, except now that precision was devoted to marking their commitment rather than managing territorial disputes. "Mrs. Kim," he said, testing the sound of her new name. "Director of International Relations for Kim Family Enterprises. My wife, my partner, my equal in everything we build together." The transformation was complete. What had begun as forbidden attraction across a crowded restaurant had become the foundation for legitimate partnership that combined their complementary strengths into something more powerful than either could achieve individually. 3 months later, Zara Kim stood beside her husband at the Seoul International Business Summit, representing Kim Family Enterprises in negotiations with technology companies from 12 countries. The woman who had once mediated territorial disputes between criminal organizations now facilitated legitimate partnerships that generated millions in legal revenue while creating jobs and economic opportunity throughout East Asia. Her natural hair was styled in an elegant updo that complemented the designer suit Daeho had chosen for her, and the diamond on her finger caught the conference room lighting as she guided discussions between Korean executives and African technology entrepreneurs. The negotiation skills that had once prevented violence now created cooperation that benefited everyone involved. Across the conference table, Daeho watched his wife work with the same intensity that had marked their first meeting, except now that intensity carried pride and satisfaction rather than forbidden attraction. The criminal leader had become a legitimate businessman whose international operations were built on his wife's expertise in cultural mediation and conflict resolution. The woman who had fled Atlanta to escape the consequences of witnessing violence had found her place as the architect of legitimate cooperation between cultures and business interests that had previously viewed each other as threats. The man who had inherited a criminal empire had transformed it into legitimate enterprise that honored his wife's values while utilizing his strategic capabilities. What had once been forbidden territory had become their shared kingdom, built on mutual respect, complementary talents, and the recognition that some attractions are powerful enough to transform everything they touch into something better than what existed before. The dove who had once mediated between predators now soared above them all, her wings strong enough to carry both of them toward a future that belonged entirely to the empire they had chosen to build together.